I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And at this time, thank everybody. I think everybody's seated or on their way out to study if you're a student. We will now have an approval of the minutes of the October 12th, 2020 board meeting. Do I have a motion? Mr. Lovelace.
I move that we approve the minutes of the October 12, 2020 board meeting.
Do we have a second? Ms. Gardner, seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a vote on approval of the minutes. Raise your hand. And it's 4 because we had 3 that weren't there. And that will be passed by 4. And do we just say 3 abstained rather than, no, okay, thank you. Next, we will have the superintendent's report and any action as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. First, before I get into the recorded items here, I think it's always important to recognize excellence. And we are celebrating, begrudgingly, the retirement of our Director of Finance, Mr. Bruce Shealy, and our our Chief of Finance Operations, Mr. Lynn Richardson. Mr. Richardson's had more than 36 years of experience in school district financing. The things that he's done during his tenure in School District 5, Mr. Richardson, I could not locate you in the audience, but when I see all eyes come to your direction, it's easy to find you. So, Mr. Richardson, you have definitely left a legacy on School District 5. The dynamic duo of you and Mr. Shealy have definitely positioned School District 5 for great success, and we pause tonight to say thank you to the 2 of you. But we're going to make sure between now and the end of December, we're going to get every hour out of you with lots of work left to be done. So tonight is not a celebration to conclude. It's a celebration of many, I suspect. First this evening, we have a report from Ms. Paschal, our principal of Piney Woods Elementary. She's coming forward to share with the board and the community our recent update regarding the logo and also school colors. Ms. Paschal.
Good evening. Ooh, I'm the first one that gets to say it. Good evening, Chairwoman Hammond and school board members and Dr. Melton and everybody else in the house. Good evening. I'm excited to be here. I look forward to seeing and supporting you all and watching you support the students and teachers and staff in District 5. And I'm really supposed to focus, so that's what I'm going to do. Maybe. Thanks, Rachel. Is it not on? Okay. I can do that. I got it. It's all good. All right. Just to recap, since about half of you are new, but I think you were here during my presentations. I'm sure you remember them because they're very exciting. So there's actually a district policy of naming the facilities. And so I used that to create this committee that's awesome. And if you're a member of this committee, I know I have at least 3 here. If you'll stand to be recognized, because they have worked tirelessly through this whole thing. And just a little bit of a recap, in order to determine the school name, our committee went through, we studied the history, maps, interviewed all kind of people, community members, and there's actually a school less than 2 miles away from our Piney Woods Elementary School that is Piney Woods School, and a part of it still stands today, and it's pretty cool. And then when we were determining the school's name, we used this creative thinking process in order to level the playing field so everyone had a voice. And it was Roger Van Eck's creative thinking process. And we actually considered 29 different name options. And came up with this rock star name. Who doesn't love that? That's awesome, right? It honors the community. You guys got to liven up now. Come on. It's exciting times here. All right, determining the mascot, we use the same creative thinking process. We actually came up with 30 different mascot options. Most of them were serious, so that was good. And then we did a top 3, and the community actually voted. And we had over 2,300 votes 54.5% voted for the winner. The majority of the votes did come from the Chapin cluster, but we did have some outside the district. This was the breakdown of the 3 options. I thought they were all cool, and I could dress up like all 3 of them so I could support it. But we are the Purple Martins, so there were Piney Woods Purple Martins, and my last name's Pascal, so we're going with the letter P, people. I mean, it's exciting times. So, the moment you've all been waiting for, right? You're really excited. I know, come on, Hammond, you've got to be excited. You always get excited with me. Come on. Woo! There you go. Let's go. All right, so in order to begin this process, the naming committee, we met and we went over different logos in schools all over the country. We actually found one out of California that we really liked. And so they gave a lot of input. Then we hired a design company and we worked with them. I collaborated with the design company. I was the liaison between the naming committee, which I guess is now the steering committee because we have a name, the steering committee and the design company. I also contacted the president and CEO of the Purple Martin Conservation Association and showed the draft logo because I didn't want there to be a Purple Martin in our logo and it not look like a Purple Martin. I think that would be pretty sad, don't you think? So it was Joe Segrist. If you haven't met him, he's super cool. They're in Philadelphia. All right, without further ado, can I get a drum roll? It's exciting. Here is Piney Woods Elementary logo. Woo! Isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it make you happy? Isn't it beautiful? It actually looks like a flying Purple Martin. So next steps, unless you guys just want to marinate. I mean, we can marinate, but I have a time crunch, so. All right, come on. My boss is telling me to get to moving. We're going to work our best to integrate the mascot, the logo, and the colors into the school's design, cafeteria tables, gymnasium floor, etc. I like to make my, Hogan knows, I like to make my school like really colorful and fun. Kind of matches my personality. And create a unique brand for Piney Woods Elementary. I think it really helps with school pride and district pride when the students are really involved in their school, as well as the family and community. Thank you so much.
Ms. Pascal, thank you for that report. How exciting.
And I did it really fast.
Very succinct. And Ms. Goggins, I was not prepared for the reveal the way it happened, so we may need to talk after the meeting for our internal communication. That might
There was no wardrobe malfunction.
Yes, I am grateful for that. Ms. Hammond, are there any questions regarding that report?
I have none, but anyone else have questions from the report from Ms. Pascal, because she's ready, willing, and able.
Yes, let's go. I will answer it to the best of my ability.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pascal.
Thank you,
And
guys.
the committee as well.
Yes, they're awesome.
Our next report this evening is going to be introduced by Mr. Giuliano, our Chief of Instruction, regarding our magnet program update. Mr. Giuliano.
Ms. Pascal, you want to come up here and do a virtual magnet discussion?
Yes, I would love to.
Bring more excitement. So thank you, Dr. Melton. I am going to introduce a special visitor that we have that you may be familiar with from previous board meetings in the past. And our Magnet School Program Director, Sarah Wheeler, she's going to be here to talk about our virtual Magnet Fair, which took place last week, and then also talk about the application timeline for the Magnet and Choice program as well, which is outlined in policy JFBA. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wheeler, who also has just as much energy as Ms. Pascal.
Okie dokie, I'm glad she went first so I could say good evening, Chairwoman Hammond. And because I would have said chairman or chairperson, but chairwoman. And honorable board members, Dr. Melton, executive staff. And for the one time in my life, I'm saying, God, that's a hard act to follow. Oh my God. Usually I'm the wild when Dr. Melton goes, hurry. So as you know, for the last several, there she goes. For the last several years, magnets have grown and been part of the culture here in District 5. If you noticed in your board packet, we've grown our magnets to 15 programs located at 11 different sites. And every year since we have begun the 2013 cycle of the Growing Our Magnets, we've had fantastic face-to-face magnet fairs. So it was quite a challenge this year to figure out how do we reach our community. So we worked long and hard, and we launched our first virtual magnet fair. And once it was over, I felt like I could go home. The year had ended. I was so anxious, but it was so successful. We had over 300 interested people register. We were able to garner a lot of information so we can reach back out. We had 188 actual logins who viewed our various booths. I know some of you logged on. They also had an opportunity to chat, some video chat with school administration. So we were thrilled. We will hold another one in January, virtual again. And then in the meantime, our application season has opened. We've started our first round of applications with our Escalaris Academy. That will go on now through, we have a timeline that you have in your packet. So we will have through the end of January our application window, and then we will have our selection, and we will be finished with that process in early February. Are there any questions?
I have one. Do we have numbers that, are they, I guess, do we have a quota, and trying to think, on each of the magnet schools that we have to work around? Like so many that can actually fit into that particular program, or is it by the number of kids at the school, you know?
Some of our programs do have numbers that we go by and we accept according to the maximum number. Then some of our magnet schools do have numbers, but we've had the opportunity to be able to grant those so far that requested some of our magnet schools.
So we've really been able to accommodate all the requests so far.
All the requests, but we do have some of our schools that are oversubscribed, which is a good thing, meaning we have lots of interested candidates for some of our schools.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Wheeler, thank you for that report. Certainly we made history last Thursday evening. It was an exciting hub to be in, hearing the sounds and the questions and the video chats, and we appreciate the interest of so many board members who dropped in to see it and the encouragement. Thanks to all the staff, the multiple departments, the multiple schools, but I definitely think it's worth note 15 programs and 11 sites is quite commendable. Mr. Giuliano, thank you to you, and also Ms. Wheeler.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our next item this evening for the superintendent's report, our Director of Accountability is going to lead for us, Mr. Holden.
Thank you, Dr. Melton. Good evening, board. As you know, every year we administer SC Ready and SC Pass testing to students in grades 3 through 8. The Education Accountability Act mandates that test take place via computerized testing. However, the state on October 27th issued guidance that we were allowed to pursue a waiver to the online testing and administer it via paper and pencil if the superintendent and the board were to approve our plan to do so. And in consultation with our elementary principals and our Chapin Intermediate principal, so our principals of schools that house grades 3 through 5, and in consultation with our Office of Instruction, Special Services, we are making the recommendation to the board that we believe that the SC Ready ELA test be administered via paper and pencil. Our rationale for that, for grades 3 through 5, I should say, our rationale for that is that we feel that the students will better display their understanding of the principles of writing and the standards of writing via paper and pencil, as opposed to having to use a computerized keyboard for that process, where they would have to master the commands associated with capitalization and finding the different punctuation. We believe that students in grades 3 through 5 are best able to express themselves via paper and pencil in writing. That was the unanimous decision and recommendation of our principals in grades 3 through 5 and our folks at the district level as we looked at that information. We're also in support of using a paper and pencil method of administration for students on homebound and home-based administration of the testing at that time period. The reason for that is our inability to ensure reliable connectivity issues as the students participate in the state assessment program at that point. So that is our recommendation. We do, if approved by the superintendent and the board, we would submit that recommendation to the state by the deadline of December 1st, and we would hope to hear back by January if our waiver has been approved.
Mr. Holden, for the clarity of the board, this is found in Exhibit A.
Yes, ma'am. I should
And
direct
so
everybody to that.
there are 2 pages there in that exhibit, and the last 2 sentences capture the essence of the recommendation from administration with the support of the superintendent. So, Ms. Hammond, we'll look for any questions that the board may have of Mr. Holden or of me, and then if there is a will of the board to support this, then we'll proceed with making this submission to the State Department of Education for the State Board of Education to then review.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Milton, you need a vote on that now?
Yes,
Or a
ma'am.
motion?
This has been something we have done for several years in a row now. So yes, ma'am, based upon the criteria, it is taken to the board for action, along with the superintendent's support of it, and I certainly do support it.
Do I, Mr. Lovelace?
I just wanted to ask a question. I think we covered this last year the same way, did we not?
Yes, sir, we have.
And we had good results from that action?
Last year's state assessment, Mr. Lovelace, was disrupted because of COVID. So there was SAT and ACT, which are national indicators of testing, and then, of course, advanced placement, work skills were required. But state assessments of SC Ready, those tests were suspended because of the COVID closure across South Carolina. But yes, sir, we did seek support of the board to do this, assuming there was going to be state assessment, but ended up not being needed because of the state did not administer these assessments last year.
Well, I mean, it's one reason that we did that last year and this year was because we don't, is there any problem with connectivity was the question. I just thought that maybe if we are to do that, maybe we'd make that the rule rather than the exception. Could we do it that way? Or we have to ask for permission every year?
Yes, sir. Every
Okay.
year, the State Department of Education sends out an application to complete for those districts that are interested. But this is an annual approval. We don't necessarily know from one year to the next if this is going to be an opportunity extended to school districts. But yes, sir, we have taken advantage of it. Connectivity, if Ms. Garris were here, she would share likely that that's always a concern. In this brief to the board, Mr. Holden and Dr. Harris have captured that we have issued devices to students, which we did not have last year, that were administered. So we do have devices in the hands of students, but it is our recommendation for the developmental preparation and the performance of our students that we not require online assessments for these bands, for these assessments.
Do you think that say if you were an 8th grader, are these assessments required to be online as high school students? They don't get the option of paper tests, do they?
We have been in School District 5 administering online for our middle school students because we feel like developmentally they have been better prepared. We have had devices in the hands of students longer. So for our elementary age students, we've been one-to-one for middle school for quite some time now. I would not say with confidence, but prior to my tenure, when I was chief of instruction, we would administer devices to our middle school students. So it's been more than 3 years, but I would need to follow up with the board on that. So we have been giving middle school assessments via online testing. It's the elementary grades that we're mostly focused upon. So when you all look at your exhibit in A, Mr. Holden and Dr. Harris have captured for us the SC Ready ELA grades 3, 4, and 5, and then also the assessments of students that are homebound, as Mr. Holden reported. And of course, any students that have individualized educational plans that have special needs identified, those two are taken into consideration to make sure that Dr. Slatton and staff have the appropriate testing for our students that they can perform their best.
Correct.
I have a question about the state testing window. Has the state decided when that is already, or is it still kind of
The last 20 days of the school year is when for SC Ready and SC Pass.
By state law.
by state
By
law?
state law.
But is that Does every school district different since we might be going longer, since we started later, or?
The last 20 days of that district's school
Okay.
year. So it could vary based on the school district depending on the last day of their school year. Great question, sorry about that.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Carter.
I'm curious, how about the students that are in 5? How are arrangements made for them to take it on paper?
So the students in 5, this is a secure test administration, SC Ready and SC Pass. So should we come to that point where we are having to administer SC Ready and SC Pass, we will have to develop some procedures for that to ensure that that is administered in a secure testing environment. With other tests that we administer, there is no state requirement for such things. For example, MAP is one of those tests that is not required to be administered in a secure testing environment. However, SC Ready and SC Pass are. So we'll need to work with our schools to develop procedures as we get closer to that time. Of course, one other issue that we're aware of and planning for is, that, as the memo points out, Act 142 has directed the State Department of Education to seek a waiver for all testing and accountability for the 2021 school year. So if that goes through the waiver to the U.S. Department of Education, we would not have to administer the SC Ready and SC Pass assessments. So we're still waiting on that to determine if we will be granted that waiver. And if we have that, then we would not have to develop those plans for how to administer to 5 students. And the reason we're submitting this waiver is to make sure we have at least this part of that plan in place should we be required to administer those assessments in the spring.
Mr. Holden, for clarity of the board and the community, when you say 5, you don't mean 5th grade. Make sure we define for the group
Correct.
what Ms. Huddle is referring to.
5 is our virtual program for students in School District 5.
Any other questions? Well, seeing none, do I have a motion? Ms. Gardner?
I move that we approve the agenda item Exhibit A, online testing waiver request.
Is there a second? Mr. Lovelace, second. Any other questions? We'll call for the vote to approve the waiver request for online testing. And I kept waiting on somebody to count. I'm sorry. It's 7-0. We passed that. Thank you.
Ms. Hammond, thank you for that, and we'll move to the next item, which is the 4th of 4 reports. This, of course, is focused upon reentry. This is presentation number 8 of a reentry focus to make sure that the board and the community are up to date and aware of the work of School District 5. As we look to this slide, slide, of course, has been one that I have used consistently, but to make sure that I'll pause to talk through the themes of these principles, beginning in the bottom left-hand corner, Principle 1. We want to make sure that our families have viable options. Principle 2 is focused upon the safety and the social and emotional well-being of our students and also our staff. Principle 3 in the upper hand right corner is focused upon our performance achievement long-term and also short-term. And then we're looking at Principle 4. This is aligned with the priorities that are included for my goals for discussion and action later this evening, but aligned with the priorities that I have previously used, of which there are 5. And then the 5th principle is focused upon flexibility, being responsible to our stakeholders and our actions related to COVID-19. This next slide is one that I could not show often enough or say enough to our community. As a staff, we've had the theme of educational researcher Dr. John Hattie, know thy impact. And I say to the staff that we have the opportunity to have a positive, a negative, or a neutral impact. I will say to our community that this staff has been committed to have a positive impact on our students, to have physical spaces ready, to have academic spaces prepared, operations in place. Each and every staff member all across School District 5 of all 23 sites have contributed to our success. So tonight, I'd like to hear the board, for me to say to the board and for our community to hear my sincere appreciation. During American Education Week, our staff has had an impact. We are making history with every operational decision that we make. I've been consistent to show this slide of reentry participation. Many of these committee members are here this evening. If they could just stand for us to see some of the faces that are on this committee to make sure that we can connect faces with work and decisions. And if you all would join me in offering this group of applause. although the entire committee is not here, this is a cross-representative representation of our school and also our district administration. And then this is a new slide. I've recently invited some teachers and support staff to be a part of these discussions, and so you see additional updates of those that have participated again to offer a cross-representation of our teachers, our school support staff, our instructional staff, to make sure they too have a voice in our decisions that we're making and the preparations that we have for the safety of our students and also the safety of our staff and our community. As we look towards consideration, this is a slide that I've been consistent to show as well. Focused upon safety at the bottom, you see the priority number 5 for me is working to provide a learning and work environment where staff and students feel safe physically, emotionally, and socially. This is always of great interest to us. And then if you look at each column, you see data. Then you see the operations to include the themes of transportation, facilities and student nutrition, scheduling, and of course, input. If I were to go back tonight and offer some updates for you, of course, DHEC data, we are monitoring that. If Dr. Harris were at the podium, he would tell you that we have 17 of our 23 schools with confirmed positive cases of staff or students. 17. Now, I celebrate the work of our staff, but that's a sobering data point. And then, of course, we monitor information from DHEC to include what kinds of reports our nurses are receiving. Ms. Stanek, that is our nursing and health supervisor coordinator, supervisor for services, she, of course, continues to be in direct contact with DHEC. Mr. Wiseman is working directly with our State Department of Education regarding the compliance of our transportation and the capacities that we can transport. I thank so many of the families that have transported their children to and from schools to help relieve some of the burden of the transportational needs. But let's remember, not all students have that resource. Not all families have an operational vehicle that they can rely upon, or the luxury of transportation that so many of us can take for granted every day. Then for our facilities and our student nutrition, we continue to be in compliance with the previous expectation from the governor because we expect our spaces such as this not to have 100% capacity. If you're out in restaurants, you see that restaurants many times have removed some of the distancing requirements. In School District 5, Director Beanbow and our reentry team with my support, we continue to make sure that we're mindful of physical spaces so that we don't have too many students. I've recently gotten many emails because, of course, this is week 2 of our 7 through 12 being back 4 days a week. And I'm receiving emails from staff and from families and even students that are saying to me, we've got congested places, there's high traffic in the hallways, there's high traffic in our spaces when we go to get meals. So Mr. Beanbow and our nutritional staff continue to work on that in support of our administration. Then there's scheduling. Now, we previously introduced to you the idea of student scheduling and staff scheduling, but the component that I'm most recently concerned about is the scheduling and the flexibility that our staff is showing. I cannot tell you how many planning periods have been lost. I cannot tell you how many hours at desk work have been lost. I cannot tell you how many schedules have been disrupted because our support staff, our instructional staff, I was in one school last week and the person I spoke with said all hands are on deck. And I took a photograph because Friday afternoon, this one support staff member at one of our schools had to cover 18 sections. 18. And let's remember, this isn't specifically for COVID. There's still viruses, there's still strep, there's still illnesses, there are still doctor's appointments, there are still sick children. So, and I know that I've got one school that I'm visiting on that one day with 18 sections that haven't been covered by staff members. We're having difficulty getting substitutes. You've heard that on the news across our state. Dr. Turner and her team continue to work with Kelly Services. Our principals are trying their best to recruit and lure in people to help us with substituting to make sure that they're focused. But we're not opening the doors to each and everybody. We do not want to have too many people in our buildings to expose our children and to spread. So I need to say to you all this evening, the strain is real. Our staff is committed, but I am concerned about them being overscheduled and overcommitted. And then, of course, input. You heard me mention earlier and show you the slide. I'm trying to make sure that I am deliberate, or the staff may tell you with a chuckle, intentional, with who we're inviting to make sure that we have voices. And I hope we have proven in School District 5 your voice matters. We want to hear you, we're listening, but there are constrictions and there are concerns that when you're inside operating, you have a different level of awareness and sensitivity. So where are we? We, of course, are working towards this reentry phases process, and Mr. Giuliano is going to come talk us through this slide and the next to make sure that we offer a summary of where we are, and then I'll be sharing where we plan to go next. Mr. Giuliano, our Chief of Instruction.
Thank you, Dr. Melton. This slide that you see here is one that we've shown previously in reentry presentations. It breaks down the first 4 phases of reentry that we've now taken place. Started back on September 8th when we started our hybrid model for in-person instruction. Our phase 2 for 4K through 2nd grade began October 5th, where we then had 4 days per week for 4K through 2nd grade. Phase 3 was 4 days per week for 3rd through 6th, and then now recently 7th through 12th grade on November 9th. Within these first 4 phases, Wednesday has continued to be a distance learning day. And throughout the process, we've also mentioned that we do have that note there that schools may utilize a 100% distance learning model during any phase if needed in response to COVID. And we will continue to have our 5 virtual program for the remainder of the school year as well. This slide as well, there are instructional model change requests. And we are currently in the process of accepting forms for our secondary 6th through 12th grade schools. And that form will be open through Friday, November 20th. Our elementary request window is now closed, and we have some families that began at the 2nd quarter to make those changes based upon schedule and class availability. So our elementary schools, actually on Thursday, November 12th, last week, they made that shift to in-person or to 5 based upon their request. And now after November 20th, we'll begin to process all those secondary requests. And then certainly admission into 5 and admission into in-person will be based upon schedule and class size availability, but we'll continue to have our hardship waiting list in play for the remainder of the school year as well. Dr. Melton.
Mr. Giuliano, thank you. So here's the new content for this evening, because much of that has been a repeat of what we've done previously. So for our 5-day reentry, it's important that I make sure that I say publicly, we want our students back 5 days. Our teachers want our students back 5 days, but there are variables that we're dealing with that not everyone is aware of. So it's my responsibility to set the context so that you all can understand. So based upon the work of our reentry team, in conjunction with teachers and staff members that we've added to this process, we have now tried to clarify what phase 5 is going to look like. There's a lot of content on this slide, so I'm going to pause to make sure the board has an opportunity to scan that information, to focus on that before I start speaking to it. So as you look towards some of the themes, I always have to make sure that we draw attention to the asterisk, because we are continuing to watch to see when might we need to revert a school or the district to whatever we need to do for distance learning if there were some event where we needed to monitor the attendance rate or the absentee rate. Those are always things of our watch that we're monitoring throughout the day, every day, to even include weekends if you all were not aware. So we've got some dates for you that we're looking towards of February the 1st. And we've also added a note that's at the bottom right-hand corner because, of course, our Wednesdays have operated a little bit differently during this first portion of our reentry processes. So we do look towards the February date. We know that Wednesdays are going to change, so they'll no longer be distance learning once we go to 5 days. Instead, we'll revert back to the late arrival for high schools and the early dismissal that was board approved by last academic year with the process for the calendar for this year. So then we look at a summary that our communications team has pulled together to try to take all that content and put it in a way that's easier to read and to absorb. And of course, you see the attention is drawn to phase 5 of 5-day instruction, which will be the 4th process of how we're going to be working towards the steps that we have here. And then the 5th that you see noted is what Mr. Giuliano just gave a report on to remind of the change of the request windows that we're offering. So Ms. Hammond, I suspect there's going to be a lot of questions from the board that we welcome. I've got a variety of people here in the room this evening that will be able to assist me to answer any very specific questions. But that would conclude this report.
Thank you, Dr. Milton. At this time, I would honor any questions. Ms. Rebecca Blackburn-Hines.
Thank you very much. My question is relating to the advice that we are getting from medical professionals. I believe we have partnerships with Prisma Health, and I'm just concerned, I don't know if concerned is the right word. I think I would be more comfortable hearing from what a physician has to say about our different steps in reentry. So when we start talking about a 5-day reentry plan, or even when we shifted to the 4-day model, what are we hearing from our medical professionals, and is there the opportunity for them to come and speak at a board meeting to alleviate some concerns about reentry,
Yes,
pros
ma'am.
and cons?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask either Dr. Harris or Ms. Stanek, our nursing and health supervisor, to come forward. We actually participated with a meeting last Wednesday with Prisma Health. So we have had a continued partnership with them, and they have been very collaborative, especially with the Midlands districts through Prisma. And of course, Lexington County Medical has also been involved. So Dr. Harris or Ms. Stanek, I'll look to one of the two of you for further information.
Absolutely, perfect segue, Dr. Melton. We did have a recent conference with our Prisma health officials as well as their executives, and this has been an ongoing for the past actually several months now, an ongoing dialogue, monthly, sometimes bi-monthly, based on what's happening in terms of the numbers that we're seeing in the DHEC data. This is an opportunity for districts in the Midlands and the Florida to kind of come together with Prisma and those medical officials to kind of talk about what's happening in our schools, to talk about what the medical officials have to say in terms of advice and recommendations, suggestions, in alignment and in concert with what DHEC and CDC might suggest to us as well. So it's a great opportunity for us to not only hear from them, but also to hear from other school districts as well, what works and what doesn't work. Contrary to that, also, in addition to that rather, we also have partnership with Lexington Medical. So we are hearing from them. We are receiving lots of attention and advice from Lexington Medical persons who are also part of DHEC. There's a direct partnership there. So we're getting, on both ends of the fence, we're getting information that will advise us and suggest to us what we need to do in terms of making determinations and decisions.
And Dr. Harris, could you add the emergency management piece of our coordination with both Lexington and Richland counties, just for the board to hear that information as well?
Absolutely. So that's another venue that's fairly new to us in terms of receiving information and documentation from our emergency management divisions, both Richland County as well as Lexington County. We have received information that gives us very detailed, specific information about what's happening in the various counties. So that is something that I was able to share on today with our executive staff to give us a very detailed, specific look as to what's happening in Richland County as well as what's happening in Lexington County. And it does advise us and gives us insight and information that, again, helps to advise us as to how we might want to move forward and obviously make recommendations to you as a board.
And I think it's from our involvement with a variety of partners, medical opinions vary as well. So we have found more confidence working with associations and hospitals rather than necessarily individuals. So we're trying to make sure that we do partner, there is a broader scope of involvement. We have had pediatricians involved. We have invited some specific local people into some groups of conversation, but we've leaned more heavily on the broader associations and agencies for guidance that we've had.
I would just make a suggestion that some feedback that I hear from parents and from teachers, we all follow the DHEC numbers. I would just make this suggestion when we have meetings with our medical professionals in our community and they're providing feedback, that there be some type of method that we communicate what they are saying during those meetings to our community, because I know that there's a little bit of a disconnect between going online and looking at the DHEC numbers and seeing the rises in cases and the percentage per county versus per zip code, but it might be a little bit more comforting, for lack of a better word, to our community to hear some medical professionals speak as to whether or not we're safe in our schools and what protocols we need to be taken on a more local level versus what you see on the news. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Melton? Ms. Huddle?
This is a question, since it says, action as needed, are we permitted to make a motion during this portion of the meeting?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion. This goes back several weeks ago where you actually made a motion that we support the superintendent by approving the policy on reentry. So I would like to reintroduce that motion, change it a little bit because the dates and times have changed. But I move that we direct the superintendent to move forward with the reentry plan presented today, November 16th, which provides for face-to-face instruction 5 days a week beginning February 1st, 2021, while continuing with the 5 remote learning option. Furthermore, if there's evidence of an increase in COVID positive tests within the zip codes in the District 5 portion of Lexington and Richland counties that may cause safety issues, a request for a revised plan can be made to the board after the evidence of an increase is presented, discussed, and approved by the board.
Is that a second? Okay. Any questions, any discussion on that? For clarification, it's basically supporting Dr. Melton's plan.
Exactly.
But we would support it with our vote.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. White?
I would just sort of weigh in. I think what Ms. Hines was just saying about asking for medical professionals' input, you know, I think another way of saying that is science input as well. I made my motion in the last meeting, and I still stand by that. We're not equipped to make this decision. We're not equipped to manage the stress. We're not going to be there operating these schools. I think we can renew our desire, but I don't think a mandate is appropriate for the board. It really ought to be based on science. I mean, I'm looking at an email from a teacher that's, you know, detailing some of the stress we got, you know, today in an email. But it's an artificial constraint. It requires us to come back and act. It becomes political if we're not listening to the science, if we're not listening to the medical evidence. And we can renew our effort, but I'm not one to say this is what the people who operate the schools have to do. The people that operate in the schools, which is principally our superintendent, needs to tell us what they're capable of doing. I can tell you the night we had that vote back in September, a friend of mine whose wife is a teacher, he contacted me later and he said, my wife had told me if that motion had passed, she was going to quit the next day. She just wasn't going to come in and work. So there's things we don't have our fingers on. That we don't have the pulse of the stresses the teachers are under, the stresses, the staff that's operating these schools, the ability to transport, the ability to bring in subs, what the science is saying, the medical professionals is part of that. But I think what y'all are doing and updating us is the best that can be done. And I don't see any reason for an artificial mandate.
Ms. Huddle?
For clarification, the motion is not that we set the policy. The motion is that we approve the superintendent's policy.
Ms. Gardner?
I agree. I feel that it's important that we support the school district and their decisions, and that if we are, like we've asked with Ms. Blackburn-Hines, if we get the science presented to us and we get the reasonings behind the reason that they've done the things that they've done, they will have full support of the board. Just because we want to be a part of that decision means that we want to support our school district. It doesn't mean we want to change the direction of it. So that's why I think it would be important so that it's not solely on Dr. Melton's shoulder or the administration. It becomes on our shoulders too. We share that weight, and there's input from all stakeholders at that point, not just the medical professions, but also the board, also the administration, and we can see their thinking behind the reason that they're making those decisions.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. Any other comments?
Can you read that motion back again?
Ms. Huddle will.
I move we direct the superintendent to move forward with the reentry plan presented today, November 16th, which provides for face-to-face instruction 5 days a week beginning February 1st, 2021, while continuing with the capital 5 remote learning option. Furthermore, if there is evidence of an increase in COVID-positive tests within zip codes in the District 5 portion of Lexington and Richland counties that may cause safety issues, a request for a revised plan can be made to the board after the evidence of an increase is presented, discussed, and approved by the board.
And what, Ms. Hammond, if I can continue, what I would say is I disagree that that's not a mandate. I mean, I read that to be direct, and you can come back and ask us to change it. I would be more than happy to support a motion that we support her initiative to move forward on that date to the extent it's safe. But the words like direct, and you come back and change it, that's more than support. That is a mandate. So I'm happy if somebody wants to make a revised motion. I made the motion last time, but that's still my position on that.
Well, unless there's another motion on the floor, I would be sure that Ms. Huddle has a copy to give to Ms. Strange, and I'll recognize Mr. Hogan.
Yes, Dr. Milton, do you have, in your reentry team, have like clear and defined measurables as to what we consider an increase or what a spike is in our community? And then also, what demographic are we actually looking at to determine the decisions that you and your team have made so far?
It is not as clear as to say a metric of one variable or one data point. When we were looking towards our bus drivers, if Mr. Wiseman were to say, thank you, Mr. Wiseman, I was trying to track you in the audience. Raise your hand one more time, Mr. Wiseman, so everyone from the board can see you. Thank you. So if Mr. Wiseman wanted to report that we are lacking enough bus drivers to provide transportation services, how many might he be able to manage before it becomes that teetering point? When we're looking at student nutrition, Mr. Biedenbow, monitoring how many of our student nutrition employees, Mr. Biedenbow, if you'd lift your hand for the board to identify your face in the audience, that if he were to look towards that he would say, how can I successfully operate the nutritional programs for both breakfast and lunch to make sure that we can provide nutrition to our students? So that's going to depend on the data that we have, and quite frankly, the meals that we're serving that day. If Mr. Cannon, thank you. If Mr. Cannon were looking towards our teams, we brought forth a policy through Mr. Richardson a few meetings ago asking to give Mr. Cannon the authority, of which we've had to execute, to move facilities teams to different locations, because we've had teams that we've had to quarantine from a school that would definitely compromise the success of that school. So if we moved enough of those teams around, it may be a low percentage, but it's a high percentage of that specialty. So I say that to give you context of it depends on the specialty and the work that those examples that we could provide. Now, if we're looking at a school team, when do you say you don't have the appropriate administrators on site to supervise? So that too may be a lower number as far as a metric, but we have staff that we can send into a school that if the whole admin team were out of the building because they've been quarantined or were experiencing illness in their household, that we could keep so many of those schools operational. But at what point do you say we don't have enough to make sure those schools can operate physically and academically successful? So I can't report to you we have an X number of percent, because so much depends on what's happening with which part of the operations. Now, we are using information from DHEC because if it were a virus season that were not COVID related, Dr. Harris could share with you that he and Ms. Stanek, where are you in the audience? Thank you. I have difficulty finding people in crowds, so thank you. Once they have been watching, if we had strep outbreak or other viruses, we would look at about 10% before a school were to be closed. But take COVID and then add flu season and add other kinds of things, it may not all be COVID related before we have to make a decision to close a site or to close a district back to distance learning, because at what point can we manage things successfully versus having students on site? In no way do we want to have a large number of students to report to a space like this or behind us in the gym, to have fewer adults monitoring a lot of students in a space, because basically instructionally you're not going to have much going on, and how would the safety be for the students in those kinds of spaces? So I regret I can't give you a clean answer of a certain number when I'm a numeric person that I prefer to drive with data, but unfortunately it depends. It depends on the context, it depends on the specialty, but every position in School District 5 contributes to our success and to our operations.
You have a question, Mr. Lovelace?
Yes, I've listened to this, for several months, and my take on it is that the board needs to have explanation to the board from the superintendent. We have not been included in that, and I understand Mr. White's take on that we're not physicians and we're not experts, but we cover a pretty broad spectrum of the economy and of the neighborhood that we live in. And I just would like to see the board included with discussion and let us be part of that discussion. We may not be the answer to it. Maybe it is more technical than that some of us could understand. I doubt it, but maybe it could. But that's the take I've got. It is that we need to be included. We don't need to be making mandates or directives, but we do need to be consulted. And I think that there's enough people here that are, I'm sure, that are intelligent enough to help do those decisions. And that's what I think we're asking for. I may be wrong, but I believe that that's what was intended and targeted by Ms. Huddle.
I would just weigh in that my understanding of it is we are simply backing what you are coming to us with. And I trust your judgment to listen to the science and come to us. But I agree with Mr. Lovelace and Ms. Huddle in the sense that we represent the community. So us having a part or a say just to approve it, to me, is simply backing you. And that's how I feel. And if there's no more discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, would you like it read again? Anybody? We good? All those in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion, please show your support by raising your hand. All those opposed? So the motion carries 6-1. Thank you.
Ms. Salmon, that completes the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Gardner.
I'm sorry, can I have, this was not to the motion, this is just another reentry question, so can we go back to that?
Oh, certainly.
I've heard from quite a few parents about the procedures for quarantine that we've been doing in our school district, and I would just like clarification because it's not really, I'm not saying it's not consistent across the school district, but I'm hearing different things. So is DHEC the one mandating that all students who are within 6 feet after so many minutes have to be quarantined? And if that is the mandate, are we not allowing, like they do if you're a superstar football player, that you can get a couple of negative tests and still come back? Is that a DHEC decision or is it a school district decision?
Well, Ms. Gardner, with all due respect, the superstar football player would not be a District 5 student athlete. So I know that you are a college football fan. I will not show allegiance nor frustrations as a college football fan.
Yeah, it's not specific to football. I'm just saying that in college levels, they're able to get tests and get right back on the field, whereas the standard that I'm being told is that in our school district, you have to be quarantined for 2 weeks, and it doesn't matter how many negative tests you've received, your child still cannot come back to school for those 2 weeks.
So our director, Ms. Stanek, I am stumbling over your title. It does not flow off my lips yet. Nursing and Health Services Supervisor. I have changed your title probably 3 times tonight, unfortunately. So my apologies for that publicly. Ms. Stanek is in her first year in this position, of course, working closely with DHEC and all of our school nurses. So Ms. Stanek, would you share with the board a response to Ms. Gardner's question?
Sure. So the quarantine procedures we use are put in place by DHEC. It's not a district policy, it's a DHEC guideline. And it can be very frustrating, and it feels kind of counterintuitive sometimes that you can get a negative test and still have to quarantine, but that is the guidelines that are put forth by CDC and DHEC. It has a lot to do with how long, it can take up to 2 days or up to 4 days to be contagious with it. You can be contagious for 2 days before you have any symptoms. And so just because you're negative halfway through your quarantine doesn't mean that you won't be contagious in the next few days. but a negative test does not end quarantine. A negative test does allow a student that's been isolated because of symptoms to return. So if we send you home with a fever or possible COVID symptoms, and you get a test and it's negative for COVID, once your fever resolves according to all the other exclusion, you're welcome to come back at that point. But that is the DHEC, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Stanek.
Well, yeah, and just as a follow-up question, this is more for procedures. When this happens, because this has been definitely a question that many have had, is it homebound? Is it the policy of the school district to initiate the homebound at that point for those students?
It depends on the wellness of the student. So, Dr. Harris, if you would come share about attendance, because if a student is quarantined but is well to participate, or if a student is ill and unable to participate in instruction, Dr. Harris, if you would respond to those details.
So to the homebound question, Dr. Milton is absolutely right. It depends on the illness of the student. It is not an automatic that a student who is quarantined or isolated goes automatically on homebound. That is not the case. In fact, we've had few cases of homebound because of COVID-related at this point. Certainly, if a student is capable of logging in and participating and well enough to participate online, they're certainly encouraged to do that. However, if they are in a face-to-face 4-day instruction and they are out because of COVID, then they would do typically what we would always have always done, and that is give them an opportunity to make up missed assignments upon their return. So that's kind of how we have broken it down from the 5-day, and then of course the response to the homebound.
Yeah, my question was specifically to those who are quarantined, not who actually have symptoms or anything, that they have been put in quarantine. So they just are expected to catch up on their own? And
if students are able to, if they're in 5 currently, we've had to look at it from both lenses, from the 5 as well as face-to-face instruction. So if they're in 5 and they need opportunity, they're out, then they can continue to log in and participate. If they are in a face-to-face instruction, going back to that schedule, if you can imagine if we had, I'm going to make this up, we had 14 or 15 students who were quarantined or a class who's quarantined, and they're not within the teacher's schedule who's teaching online, I mean, that is a real disruption. So we have to follow, and what our State Department has advised is that if they're in face-to-face instruction, they will, in fact, continue what we've always done, and that is opportunity to make up missed assignments. So that's how that looks. Yeah. So we have to look at from both students who are enrolled in 5 or students who are enrolled in the 4-day, in the current 4-day face-to-face instruction. Having to look at it from 2 different lenses.
And I think the key of that, Dr. Harris, would be for the family to be in communication with the teacher or teachers, letting the instructional staff know if the child is well enough to participate with instruction, or if the child is ill and not feeling their best to be able to participate, that the staff would work with them and then assist that family with routing to the appropriate services. Would you encourage that?
Always the case, always the case. Nothing beats the time to log in or communicate with the teacher to let a teacher know what's happening with the student. So nothing beats that at all. There's no replacement for that. Highly encourage, whether they're students in 5 or whether students in 4-day instruction, to maintain dialogue and communication absolutely with teachers.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Gardner, for mentioning a question, because with the motion, I may not have asked if there were any other questions after her presentation on reentry. Anybody? I had one, Dr. Melton. Have we had many students that have applied that have been in 5, but when the semester with, well, say high school age and middle school, have we had a large number that have requested to come back to the, in person?
Our hardship has been very active. I don't know if Director Holden or Dr. Harris would like to answer this. I'll look to one of the two of them. They've both been involved with different angles of this process. So we've had the hardship that's been active. Dr. Harris has been working to make sure with the window of instructional changes, elementary has closed, high school is opened. So Director Holden.
We've had just under 300 requests for movement. Now about 75% of those have been to move to in-person instruction. About 25% have been to move to 5. And of course, that window for applying for those moves is open through the end of this week, Friday.
That's for middle and high school?
Yes, ma'am, grades 6 through 12.
So, and the window is closed for elementary?
Yes, ma'am, they can apply through a hardship though through Dr. Harris for that part of that process.
Okay. I was just trying to get a figure as to, you know, if we've been able to accommodate most of the people, whichever one they wanted to change to.
For our K-5 students, we were able, I believe with Ms. McCaskill and Ms. Cohen, and our school was able to accommodate every request that was made during that time period. Ms. McCaskill, is that accurate?
That's
Yep.
great.
And we've been able to schedule all those students. They actually began their new placement on the first day of the second quarter, which was the Thursday of last week.
And have we had any type of, and maybe this is too soon, but have we had any type of evaluation that's come directly from our teachers as to how they feel this is working, or how best, if there was any way, you know, getting teacher input for any tweaks that might help the teachers load? Because I mean, I realize some of them are having to do both, and, you know, I just would love to see if we've got some type of teacher involvement, and not just one teacher that's representing a bunch of teachers, like the Teacher of the Year. I'd like to see that we're hearing in some type of evaluation form from our teachers how we could improve it for their workload.
Yes, ma'am, and I'll address that. This is a slide that shows some of the names that participated recently with reentry. Ms. Hammond, if you notice, there are names of different positions across the district at different levels, support and certified staff as well. Dr. Blunt that I see here this evening, she and Ms. Lunsford with 5 for elementary and secondary. They are meeting regularly with our 5 teachers and those that contribute to sections of 5. They've done some graphic organizers and some feedback of open-ended questions of what's working, what needs attention. We've replicated that with those that are on site with face-to-face. Of course, Ms. McCaskill will report having our PK through 2nd grade start as the first phase of 4 days. We've gotten more information from them. This, of course, is the 2nd week for 7 through 12. So I think if you were to talk with our 7 through 12 teachers, they're still normalizing what it's like to operate in a 4-day model. But we make sure that we have representation on committees, meeting with faculty advisory later this week, meeting with parents cabinet tomorrow. If you talk to any of the advisories, you're going to see that I've met with them more this year than I have on average of any other, because we wanted to make sure that we continued those conversations. And then, of course, the visibility of our school administrators, that's critically important of how we're hearing from teachers. And then, of course, emails and access of administrators. But has there been a survey? No, ma'am, there's not. But there have been conversations, there have been opportunities, and there have been some what I would call roundtable discussions to make sure that we're asking questions that are consistent. If Dr. Gary were to come to the mic as a high school representative of high school principals, he can tell you that our high school students actually assisted with creating some random survey questions that the students wanted to ask. So we've tried to give our students some opportunities at the high school level, and then elementary, middle, and intermediate, we have tried to make as developmentally appropriate as we could make.
Thank you, Dr. Milton, and I would just say it's so important for all of our teachers and principals to feel communicated, that
Yes,
they have an open avenue for communication. My last question on this, if we can help as a board, I do know about substitutes being a problem because of the COVID. As a teacher, we have that same thing, probably it's going on in every district. Since we voted to use Kelly Services, Dr. Milton, can we go outside of Kelly Services without a vote from the board if you needed to have another source of substitutes?
Kelly Services, of course, we have a contract with them that Dr. Turner and Mr. Richardson both monitor to make sure we're implementing correctly. At this time, we are not aware of additional services that may be out there because the workforce is not readily available for this. So Dr. Turner actually updated us today in executive staff. She is polling, I would say, her SCASA roundtable to find out what some other districts may be doing and share some ideas of what she and her team have developed that have included feedback from teachers and principals. But we're not confident with those ideas at this point that we're prepared to share, but we are definitely researching and trying to vet to make sure what we do with attorneys and legal counsel is appropriate, is adequate and defensible, but also curious to see if some other districts may be doing some things that maybe we've not implemented at this point. So we can provide that for the next report.
I would like for us to, I know that's so important to teachers, because teachers sometimes feel so guilty to take off. They can, when they have sick children or husband or whatever, because they know how hard it is for you to get a replacement.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'd love to have some other options there. Ms. Huff?
I'd like to ask if we could at the next report, you mentioned we had 17 of 23, I think, students and staff that had confirmed cases. I think the public is seeing, you know, they know of a student in say their child's classroom that tested positive, but then they go out to because they got the notice and now their kids are quarantined. But they go out and they see on the DHEC website that there's a 0 for that school. And I don't think that's our fault. I think there's just some disconnect in the way that's being reported. But I guess what I'm asking is, maybe in your future reports, could you provide how many students, how many staff have tested positive by week, maybe, so we can see trends, as well as how many students are quarantined by week, just so we can see trends. And I think that'll also eliminate some of the confusion with the public thinking that the numbers are, you know, being hidden or different. It's just DHEC doesn't report them maybe the same way we do.
Yes, ma'am, we'll definitely continue to work with DHEC and to provide the updates that we can. Real-time data, you know, it takes some delays, and they've got scheduled times of when DHEC posts, and we want to make sure that what we communicate has a time frame on it as to when it did communicate. But I need to say one more time to the community, the quality of our data is based upon the information from our families and, of course, information from our staff. So we've got to make sure we've got valid information coming in so that we have a grasp on the context of which we're dealing.
Thank you.